an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Here we go. Welcome in. It's the 9th day of December. It's a Friday, and for all intents and purposes, it's tools down at Queen's Park for the next couple of months or so. And I know people will be bitching and complaining, saying these guys aren't doing anything. Well, you know, they're going into the constituencies, and they're going to be doing, quote, work. So I'm sure they'll be having all kinds of consultations and town hall meetings and pancake breakfasts just to make sure that everything that they're doing in Ford Nation is on track, and they're getting the pulse of their constituency. Dave Trafford here with you. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Keith Leslie and John Wright at the table. Our friend and colleague, Sabrina Nanji, lost the voice. So if you want to know what's on Sabrina's mind, check out her newsletter. It is published daily. So it's a real task, and she really digs in on some cool stories and manages to break a lot of good stories at the Queen's Park Observer, and I would encourage you to pay for the good work that she does and subscribe to the Queen's Park Observer. Okay, here we go. I've got a couple of things that I want to get into vis-a-vis more or less the conversation that we had started a few weeks ago, I guess, and just around the whole housing initiative, Strong Mayor initiative, that went through. But I want to start just with the comments that the Premier made, unbidden. He was, talking about transit, I think, in Brampton. Final question comes to him. That's all good. But before he actually wraps up, he decides to go on a bit of a rant in front of the media in Brampton.
Thanks so much.
Okay, well, I just want to add, about the situation we're looking at building homes. Folks, I have to tell you, there's 300,000 people coming here every single year. And I know we have a few mayors that, don't want to play in the sandbox, and one being Mayor Crombie, and I don't know what her issue is. But I'll just give you an example. We have an ambitious target. I'm going to use Mississauga because I used Toronto before, of Mississauga building 120,000 homes over the next 10 years. That's about 12,000 homes every year, and that's far from the city's current annual average of 2,100. And you can't, the definition of insanity is continue doing the exact same thing over and over again and expect a different result. And that's not going to work. I see that Mayor Crombie's out there handing out flyers and doing this. All I say is get on board, stop being disingenuous, with the people of Mississauga. It's just absolutely wrong. Mississauga has increased their fees on new home buyers by nearly 30% in the last 2 years alone. In fact, Mississauga adds, every single home that's built adds $126,000 to the price of that home, and that's tough on newcomers that are coming here and families that have kids that are growing up. They want to buy a home, or if your grandchildren want to buy a home. It's very simple. It's like economics 101, supply and demand. And when you have 300,000 people coming to our province, and we just sit back and couple municipalities, Mississauga being one, saying, oh, we can't do that. We can't do this. Mississauga brings in more than $34 million each year in municipal taxes on home buyers. Each year, they're spending about $25 million, or less than 75% of those funds. And for parkland fees, Mississauga brings in more than $17 million annually, and they only spend $9 million. Or 53% each year. And they're holding $271 million of those funds collected in reserves. So I'd also like to point out that the city waives, this is the ironic thing, folks. We have Mayor Crombie complaining about our fees, but the city waives similar fees to encourage building office space downtown, and I'm all for that. But you can't say one thing one day and say you're against it, and then you go the next day and do exactly what we're asking you to do. I'm asking for a partnership with Mayor Crombie, Mayor Tory, all the other mayors. If we sit back and think some magical thing is going to happen, or you think when people come here we're going to start living in mud huts, it's not going to happen under our government. We want to work collaboratively, cooperatively with you, but we need to get on board and start moving forward and stop the whining and complaining that I hear day in and day out. Anyways, folks, all the very best. We're going to continue building transit. We're going to continue building homes. Thank you. God bless.
Yeah, the only thing that was missing there, Keith, is I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas. Right? I mean,
holy cow!
Right? And I wanted to play the whole clip because all that got played in the media the morning after was the stop whining part. I think you needed the full context of the rant. He really wound up on her.
Boy, did he ever! And it's as if he had some prepared talking points to nail there. I mean, all the percentages and how many dollars and all this sort of stuff. Right off the top, he's saying Mississauga is charging $126,000 in development fees that they don't need, I guess is his claim. Well, then can you guarantee us in any way, shape, or form that the price of a new house in Mississauga will be reduced by $126,000 when it comes to market? Of course not.
No.
You just can't, because there's so many market forces, demand being, I think, probably the biggest in determining how high house prices will go. So this is just unbelievable to pick an attack with, now, Mayor Crombie is a former Liberal MP, so, he's a Conservative, she's a Liberal, but so what? All the municipalities are lining up to say, in Mississauga's case, this is going to cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. And no, of course, the average person doesn't know municipalities don't spend all those development fees at once because the houses aren't built all at once. So they need to provide a lot of infrastructure to these new subdivisions or new high-rises or whatever it's going to be. The money isn't all spent the day they get it in. No, that's not the way it works. So he's using accounting tricks and numbers, tricks, accounting and numbers to throw back and, make it seem as if the case is a lot simpler than it is and these municipalities are all floating in development fees. I don't think that's necessarily the case, and this money is generally allocated for the purposes it's meant for. But the bottom line is, will it reduce the price of a house by that much? No. Will building houses on the Greenbelt make them, as he calls them, affordable and attainable? No, of course not. And so many municipalities have taken this position, by the way. Just so you know, Mayor Crombie has just been elected head of the large cities mayors in Ontario. I think there's a message there.
So, well, I did talk to her. This is before the premier went on the rant, and he talked about, I want a partnership, and this is not a partnership. If this is what we're starting, you're not asking for a partnership. You're asking for acquiescence, basically. I mean, you do it my way or don't. You just shut up and stop whining is not the way you start the conversation for a partnership. And I asked the mayor about this before Ford even went off on his tangent.
Work with the Ontario government, the federal government, and the development community to incentivize builders or developers to build more affordability into their new housing projects. And a lot of these financial incentives have to come from a different level of government, not at the expense of cities, because at the end of the day, we need to continue to invest in our cities to make them great. Our budgets don't allow for financial incentives.
So then, if I'm reading between the lines there, you're not really thrilled with the idea of foregoing the development fees for the developers in terms of how that would go into a lot of the infrastructure, all of the other amenities that would go around any area where you're building new and more affordable housing.
So that revenue that we would lose from DCs, it would be given as an incentive to developers, which, by the way, I don't think go towards reducing the costs. That just goes towards increasing their profitability. Frankly, that has to be made up somewhere. And I think the provincial and the federal government are well aware that that money has to come from somewhere. We would have to be compensated for any lost DCs. Now, I'd be willing to entertain reduced DCs or waiving of DCs in special circumstances, like building more housing affordability is one area, or certainly long-term care, seniors care. That tool is appropriate in some circumstances, but can't be widely used as a lever just to incentivize the building of market housing.
When the housing initiative was announced with great fanfare at Queen's Park, was there any consultation or conversation with you or the other mayors of the GTA? Because primarily that's where a lot of the heat is going to come around the housing. In as much as to say we're doing this, the developer charges and fees are on the table here, just so you know.
So certainly there has been wide-ranging discussions. That the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing has come to our Ontario Big City Mayor caucuses regularly. I thank him for that. Premier has appeared once as well, but certainly there could have been more consultation. I know the task force that developed the housing blueprint for the province did not include any municipal leaders or any municipal planners. And I think that was a big oversight. I think that part of the equation was lacking when the blueprint was written.
So, John, I mean, I don't know if that qualifies as whining or not, but I think the mayor makes her case forcefully. I think she makes it logically, and I think that's what's needed in this conversation. The issue is, do we want housing first built, second affordable housing, and then the third part of it is how are we going to support it in the community and make sure that it's paid for? There's only one taxpayer, and that's what's getting lost in this conversation.
Well, Dave, I'm not an expert on the intrigues of who takes what from the pot, right? I mean, even in your own backyard, I live in Josh Matlow's riding. And, there's a street project where he says that there was a condominium complex and they were made to donate $350,000 to a pot so that they could be used then to work in the local area. And it's now going to be matched by some city funds, but probably not because of the deficit. So that's kind of where I see this, where the, local governments get money. They are able to put it into things that they want to upgrade. It also provides, reserve funds to do bigger things. But much to Keith's point, this is money which is given into once the thing is, on the books and completed, so that they have the revenue to do that. And so it's not all at once. And nowadays, especially following the reckoning of the COVID, which the reckoning is still going on, they need the money. All right, so let's set that aside and just look at the pure politics of this. This is the get-her-done government. This is the first-term government, which means that you get her done in that part. And in the last couple of years, you make sure that you're nice to everybody. So that's one of the other things that's going on. Thirdly, get it done before you go on Christmas break, because you can get into the new year and start fresh. Like they're out, right? Like there's no more criticism. Everything is fine. So you've got some of the political principles here that are usually put to the test, and that is get in, get her done, and get out. Those are the 3 G's. Okay. But when you combine what's happening with the Greenbelt, where critics would say you lied and you're being autocratic, if you combine that with the strong mayor's powers, which is you're trampling on the rights of citizens in a couple of cities, when you say you just do this because of housing needs, and you don't, for instance, balance it by saying, look, this is a pie chart and 20% of it's going to be affordable walk-up housing, and it's going to have a tenancy circumstance here so that young people can get into it. I mean, these immigrants that he talks about and others are not going to be able to afford $1.5 million homes. Let's get that straight. Even in the GTA, the prices are dropping, but by the time these things are built, they're not going to be cheap. There's no edge. There's no softness to this. There's no partnership or consideration or consultation. It's just kind of like, look, we have this problem. We're going to put a highway through. We're going to put houses down. We're going to lay all of these things down. And I go back to what I said last week. The narrative, which I don't think the NDP, given their new leader, is going to pick up on that much. But the narrative is really of an autocratic government. It's a good thing we didn't have to wait 21 and a half hours to do this podcast this morning. But my point is that, even wait times. I mean, they have a minister who doesn't like to come out and talk to people and engage with people. He's only been forced out since we did this podcast and talked about it, not too long ago. It's a government which now makes decisions without consultation. It's a government which basically, when you push back, says screw you. Go and clean up your own house, look after your things before you start whining and complaining. Be grateful that we're getting things done for the people, and probably looks at its own polling numbers. It says roughly 40% of people still support it because that's what they got in with. So that's the dynamic that I see this through. I'm not an expert on the, Metrolinx and, what it says or the transfer of funds or taxpayers' money and stuff like that. But I do know that this is a collision that's happening on a number of fronts, and it's painting a picture of a government where a new narrative is about to be raised, and that's going to impede their progress in the next year. It will, because it's creating opposition groups that are going to be gathering, I think, with other unions and other opposition groups to come down on this government, and it's going to be a very interesting year ahead where that opposition comes to play.
Well, I want to get into some of the snowball effect here, but let's just go back to the politics for a second, Keith, because, a year ago, this was the sweet spot for the Tories. They were focused on 905. We need to have 905 if we're going to form a government. Toronto can be Toronto, and it's going to be ever thus. This is more than a shot across the bow at 905. Let's not forget that Mayor Crombie was reelected. She's heading into her third term as mayor, and well-liked, well-supported. So he's really tangling, like grabbing the tiger by the tail here, I think.
You're suggesting that she's going to somehow leading to these new Canadians living in mud huts is not seeking a partnership?
No, again, sorry, just to that point, she represents one of the most diverse communities in the country, if not North America.
I thought it was quite brave of him to bring up the idea, though, of mud huts, considering that one of the biggest criticisms of this housing legislation is that it's lifting the ban on building on floodplains because we can trust the builders not to do that.
Right.
Really? We can trust the builders not to build on every possible square inch they can build on. No, we can't. That's why they lobbied to have these things changed. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And the politics of the 905 is clearly saying, I don't need you for 3 more years. Things will have changed a lot by then. And if I get these houses built, people aren't going to care. I think even if he does get these houses built, people will care because they're going to be not affordable and attainable, as he keeps saying. They're just certainly not the ones that are being built on the Greenbelt. And I think this is where this government really, really falls into a huge area of losing the public trust and having no way really to regain it, I think. This is one where, remember, and we all remember, that Doug Ford was caught on tape just before he became premier, telling developers he would open up some of the Greenbelt for them. When caught and when confronted with this in the very quick backlash, he backed down, and between him and his housing minister, Steve Clark, they said 18 times between now and then, straight up, we will not touch the Greenbelt. We will not touch the Greenbelt, will not develop it. And look what's happened. And of course, just before they touch the Greenbelt, several developers, 2 or 3 very well-connected ones with lobbyists who happen to have worked in the premier's office or in the housing minister's office, all of a sudden, they bought land in the last couple of years that was in the Greenbelt that was not going to be developed. And lo and behold, it's now free to be developed and is worth something. One estimate is that the lands of a couple of these developers is worth now upwards of $750 million. Land that until a few months ago was not going to be developed at all. So it doesn't pass the smell test overall. There's no, I guess no one's found any direct links yet to say that, the government has done this other than to just favor the developers because it's just plowing ahead to get its housing goal met. But the politics of it all, shunning the 905 and just plowing ahead with this, I don't know. It must somehow, as John says, their polling must show this is the ultimate goal and the people will respect you in the end for sticking to your goal. But they won't respect you for breaking your word on such a fundamental thing. And the talking points about, the Liberals opened up the Greenbelt, so what? It's like, Mama used to say, if your friend jumped off the cliff, would you jump off? It's the same thing. That's no defense. And I don't know how the degree to which the Liberals opened it. I haven't looked at that closely. This, though, is being opened up for some very specific development lands against everyone's recommendations, pretty much except their own. So the politics of it all appear to be Tories helping their friends, which is the biggest criticism against them, and giving up their fundamental trust of the voters by just shattering their frequently repeated promise not to open up the Greenbelt. That's the core politics of it all to me, and I think it speaks back to what John said. Remember, when they did this legislation, no one, the Association of Municipalities, no one was asked to comment on this legislation. Really, they held like a half-day's hearings. They did not want to hear from the public, which is the interest groups, even the very vested interest groups who are going to be affected by this most, because they're acting in a dictatorial manner. They're just plowing ahead with this, feeling that our way is right, and that's just all there is to it. I think it's bad politics. It's certainly not the consultative way Ontario politics is normally run, and I think there will be a price to be paid for it. As I say, it's just shattered trust. You just can't believe what they say when they've gone back on something they repeated so many times they would not go back on.
You know, I have to agree with Keith on using the words dictatorial. I would shy away from them. You know, even 6 months ago, I would never have really brought up this sort of stuff, but it's an accumulation of issues. And we have to look even at long-term care, where that was shoved through without really any debate whatsoever. It goes to the heart of the 1 cent pay cap, where it's, you know, my way or the highway. It goes to the unions with the support workers in schools and the use of the notwithstanding clause for the third time. Yeah, it wasn't actually getting through. It didn't get through, but it was used in those circumstances. So again, you go back to this narrative, which is beginning to build. I think if you put it into the current political mix at Queen's Park, though, and we talk about the NDP leader, who's, you know, a member just down the street from where I live. I don't think they've effectively elected someone yet who has demonstrated that she's going to be a force to reckon with. Even in the first interviews. I mean, when you're asked after you've been elected by one, what do you want to do as leader? And you take a 10-second pause to kind of enunciate that. It's not a good thing to do. And anyways, we all know that new leaders oftentimes need rehabilitation before they become a force of nature. So let's put it that way. But you now look and see that there could be the revitalization of a Liberal Party. I don't know whether or not the member from Barrie, or whether Bonnie Crombie herself wants to take the helm now. But you've created an opportunity for the Liberals to mass against this government in a number of different parts. Downtown Toronto is one of them. They've always been there, but now you've got, you know, people like Josh Matlow and others who may not be as respected as some of the others on council, but the reality is that there's a force that's going to keep this alive. You've got mayors, you've got a group of other people. Both of those other people I just said are former mayors, right? So there's an interesting constellation coming out now for an alternate universe with the Liberals. I'm not writing off the NDP. I just don't see, you know, that as somebody who's going to do something at the moment. But there's a really underlying constellation here for the Liberals to get it right for them. And I don't know of any other time in the last number of years that has existed the way it does today.
Well, let me suggest, though, that the answer here also hinges on the fact that housing and affordable housing was the number one issue in the election, and the Tories won going away. So, and I get your point around, you know, the trust issues and so on.
Did they mention the Greenbelt? Did they mention
at the same
I
time,
don't think so.
we had fewer than a third of the eligible voters casting ballots. So, quite frankly, people don't give a rat's rectum what's going on at that level in terms of politics. I think they have an opportunity to skate here.
No, I'm fundamentally going to disagree with you. You put up 3 candidates who and a good campaigns by those people, and you'll get people out. I mean, we were at the end of COVID, but for God's sake, go back and look at that election campaign with the weak leaders that we had. You know, Mr. Blue Vest in red, and you know the three-time tread loser. You know, who's offering up nothing and did really badly in the day. So yeah, well, okay. So, but let's look at that. And the reality is that the 40% that they got in this election is equal to the 40% they got in the last election from a percentage point of view. I mean, so let's set that aside. And secondly, you know, there's a lot of pocketbook stuff that was going on. It wasn't all about affordable housing, and you know, there's things about post-COVID and other things. So I don't agree with that assessment. What I do think, however, is that when you lump this in together, and healthcare is an issue, I mean, the real question that has to be asked is, are they?
No, that's not an issue. The minister says
No.
But
as I said last time, as an example, shut up. She said, look, we don't have evidence of nurses leaving the profession. As opposed to answering the question. Of course they're not. The real question on healthcare, left for another day of debate, is kind of like, are you deliberately bleeding this healthcare system so it becomes privatized in that way? Is that what you're doing? Because it seems to be like it, and now what you're going to have is 21 and a half hours of wait time, so you're going to have to solve that somehow, and it's not going to be solved by the current structure of the healthcare system. So what do you do? But again, going back to this, the agenda is a very they've taken a plane down a very short runway and have taken off, and it's caused all kinds of turbulence. The question is whether or not there's some legitimate and substantive opposition to that, which I don't think there is at the moment. I think there's a lot of people who are clustering and complaining and things like, but there's nothing. And when I say legitimate, it's not about the complaining; it's about the the force to push back. And secondly, is the government in the new year going to compromise on some of these things and actually soften what it's doing in order to make it more palatable?
Let's face it.
Things for me.
The way John just brought in, the NDP are just not, we don't see Merit Stiles, or he doesn't see her as coming in as a leader right away effective. Perhaps an actual leadership contest
that
with a series of debates where she could have honed that speech and really, why didn't the party find someone to run against her so they would have had the publicity? There was no race, no new members signed up, because that's what you do in a leadership race. You get new members in, you rejuvenate the party, no new ideas coming in. So as John said, well, what do we see here? Do we see someone who stood up to Doug, or, can say, I'm going to take Doug Ford, I got to take this, team down and have some great rhetoric to go with it? No, I mean, they've lost so much by her winning this by acclamation. They really, really have. And I think that's an important point. I also thought an important point, and I know we're going to get tight in our podcast time, and I really want to discuss the health stuff as well. But I thought it was really significant and very unusual that the lieutenant governor, when she came in to sign the bills on Thursday to, finalize the bills, including the one that, enables these strong mayors and these other powers, talked about the need to defend democracy and how important it is to us. Now, the lieutenant governor would never send a direct political message. I know that's outside their bailiwick. But the opposition party certainly took it as a direct message to the current progressive conservative government in Ontario, whereas the government House leader very smartly deflected it to, she's commenting on the whole world situation.
Of course. And
democracy is absolutely under threat in the whole world. But is it under threat at home? And I think there was certainly a clear message there from the lieutenant governor that we need to very, very preciously safeguard what we have, and that perhaps it is under threat everywhere, including at home.
Well, not to get off on too much of a tangent here, but I was just looking at Angus Reid numbers this week, and they were talking about approval ratings for the premiers. And that narrative certainly is focused and targeted on Danielle Smith in Alberta based on her Sovereignty Act. Just for the notes here, her approval rating is higher than Doug Ford's right now. So, when you look at it, and he's in the sort of the low to mid 30s.
Hey, we had to call the CHIO, Children's Hospital in Eastern Ontario, had to call the Red Cross in.
I know.
And how many other parents have been in other emergency departments waiting and waiting and waiting with wailing and sick children?
You know what? I've talked to healthcare workers who said, if you've got a sick kid, I wouldn't send them to the Sick Kids Hospital now.
One of the nurses at the
think about that.
Well, a nurse in Ajax Pickering Hospital said a child died on the emergency department floor because there was no stretcher. A 2-year-old child. The government says it's investigating this case. Calling in the Red Cross at CHIO, apparently and I don't like this practice of having the parliamentary assistant stand up in questioning period and take answers for the actual ministers, but the parliamentary assistant to the health minister have, that's part of the plan. They actually had to get the health minister out to say, oh, no, that wasn't part of the plan to need the Red Cross, because it's not really a hurricane or a flood. That's, this is a crisis in children's care. And I think that may account in huge part for the government's falling numbers. And boy, they're going to be, they came in on the promise to end hallway medicine, and things have gotten not only worse, much, much, much worse post-pandemic. It's amazing how bad it has gotten and how frightening it is. As you say, parents are being told, don't bring your sick kid to the hospital.
Yeah.
Where do you go? What do you do? Yeah. You can't go to the drugstore. There's nothing on the shelf.
But
holy cow.
Yeah, but this speaks to two things. Number one is that people want to be assured that you care about what they think. So healthcare, we have a minister who is in charge of public health, but rarely is seen in public. Rarely is seen, offering that empathetic kind of thing. I don't think she has the bedside manner to do it, for what it's worth. Secondly, when we talk about the Angus Reid approval numbers, their numbers show 34%. My own polling would show them about 5 points higher in the approval. And that's simply a matter of how we both calculate these things, right? Like it's the methodology involved. But let's cut it in the middle at 37, 38 days. You don't need a majority to get a majority in this province. And as I said, they got in with about 40% last time. Well, they did 40% last time and the time before that. And they're now sitting at about, if we agree with to cut it down the middle, at 38. I'd have them at 40. That this get-her-done government is looking at the numbers and they're saying, look, we've got our constituency. Everybody else is whining and complaining. We're going to get this thing done. I caution on the narrative. They've created one that if Bonnie Crombie or somebody else who's strong within the Liberal Party wants to take them on, there's a whole bunch of ticked boxes here for a narrative that could bring those numbers down significantly and bring the numbers for the Liberals up. And then I talk purely politics, but you're right. We should spend some time on the healthcare file next time, because it is something where people, I do the polling on this. People are scared to go to the hospital. There are people who are not tending to diagnosed things when they feel like they should be going to the hospital. And it's causing a whole bunch of other problems in the healthcare system, probably a collection of people who have died for waiting too long. There's a serious issue where we have a healthcare minister that continues to be missing in action, and missing in action is providing not just empathy, but a sense of care and concern that this exists and something's going to be done about it.
Well, I get more than tired of the narrative, particularly in the media. Well, these people shouldn't be going to. They should be going to your walk-in clinic because you've got a cold or whatever. The fucking walk-in clinics aren't even open when I need them to be open. So where are we addressing those gaps, those problems, those shortfalls, period? And the other part of I saw, just kind of add on to the insult to injury, the whole idea of the 1% was one thing, and that got, kicked out by the courts, and we've talked about that. But the other side of this is the government's willingness to stand up there and say, we've got your back all the way through the COVID and the frontline workers. There was a CBC story this week talking about one of the nurses who, they were promised that $5,000 pandemic bonus. Hasn't seen it. There were supposed to be 3 installments by now, not a bloody red cent. And I forget what it was, $763 million in an initiative to, reward.
Yeah, but I got my
them.
license rebate, though.
That's right.
What have nurses done for us lately?
And lucky that they're not working for a grocery company.
They could go to an agency, because the minister forgot to mention, for some reason, agency nurses when she said there was all these employment opportunities for nurses. That's why they're growing. She forgot to mention the agency nurses for some reason. I'm not clear why.
So the gaps here are incredible. But maybe to your point, John, this is sort of the salvo going into the break, and they can hit a reset button, and we'll all have short-term memory loss by the time we get to Family Day.
Yeah, but I want to say one thing as we close off here. Look, is there a strategy behind all of this? In other words, is there kind of the uber underpinning of where they're going with all of this? I don't know. I don't know whether this is simply the case that some lobby. No. But I don't know whether there are some lobbyists who are having higher and louder voices than others. I don't know. I mean, you have to say that this is a different government in terms of how it's approaching it, after COVID. I don't know, after the election. I don't know whether there's somebody in the Premier's office who is directing this in a different way than it was before, but a lot of the people are still intact. There's something else here at play. And whether it's the privatization of things or again, this is a thematic, and maybe we should, Sabrina would have been best to have on this program this morning. There is something else potentially at play, or there's just day-to-day chaos where people are having an outstanding voice as opposed to a coordinated voice.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's leave it at that. So we will take the break. We'll get back to you some point in the new year. My guess is that we'll be back in the in your podcast app before the legislature gets going, because some of this will percolate to the top. So you guys, I hope you get to enjoy some quiet and holiday with family and just sort of kick back and relax.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas to all. Best of the season to everyone.
Yep. Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho.
Very good. All right.
Yeah.
That'll do it for us here on The Ledge. It's your Ontario Politics podcast. Dave Trafford here with Keith Leslie from CHCH-TV and, of course, John Wright from Maru Public Opinion.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.